Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing the Ryzen 5 1400 plus the RX 470 4GB. I'll be trying to get to 60 frames per second, so I'll be using 1080p on pretty much all videos, on many games. If you want to skip to any particular game you want to see, check the timestamps down in the description or the pinned comment. First I'll be doing Battlefield 1 on 1080p. You'll see on the bottom left corner of the video that there's a graph. That's for the frame times, so a lot of people asked me in previous videos of Battlefield 1 to put this graph in the bottom left corner using a console command. So far it was totally playable. It was 50 to 80 frames per second most of the time. Even when explosions happened, the frame times weren't as bad as I expected. There are some peaks every now and then that you will notice, but overall it's a totally playable experience, and 60 frames per second is possible, but there are some drops every now and then.
Objective Charlie.
GTA 5, I'll be doing 1080p once again with 2x MSAA, and the rest of the settings you can see them into the video. My objective here once again is to get to 60 frames per second and try to stay over that target. You'll see when I'm flying in a chopper at the beginning of the GTA 5 footage that I drop below 60 quite often. That's one of the ways to make the game drop below 60 frames per second. Then I'll just get into the intersection of two big streets and start blowing up cars as low as 45 frames per second. For me that was the worst case scenario so far, but I had better results with my 1050 Ti in this case, trying to get 60 frames per second. That's why I used 2x MSAA to use the GPU beta, since I wasn't using the GPU to its full capacity. I mean, if I turn off MSAA, the game was running the same, so it was just GPU power to spare. But yeah, so far it's between 45 and a little over 60 frames per second. And the worst case scenario is when you're blowing up many cars at once and they are all on fire. The drops that I noticed personally without an FPS counter are pretty much the drops below 50 frames per second. So if it's between 50 to 60, personally I'm fine with it. The only ones that I noticed were the ones that were below 50. I think it's a pretty good experience overall. The Witcher 3 I'll be doing once again 1080p, and now I'm going to be using a mix between medium, high and ultra, a couple things on medium, and on post-processing I'll be using SSAO instead of HBAO, and the rest you can see it in the video itself if you want more details on it. And my objective here is to stress the CPU, so I'll be going into the part that I personally had the most issues on the CPU side, which is the city Novigrad. I'll be just going on horseback into it, so you can see pretty much how it runs. Overall I was over 60 frames per second without much of an issue. I had some stuttering in the very middle of the city when there are a lot of NPCs and it's a very open area, but outside this area I didn't have much of an issue maintaining 60 at all.
The eternal fire will light our way. The new Wraith thinks you're a bigger replica than us. great cabbage last night.
Long live Radovid!
Full of sour.
Plans to surrender unorthodox books. Grimoires and trusts blaspheming the sacred claim especially.
Stinks of burnt flesh. Can they not burn those fires?
Fallout 4, I'll be doing 1080p with FXAA, and I'll be using a mix between high and ultra with God rays turned down to low, since they don't look that much different but they have a performance impact, and you can see the rest of the settings in the video itself. So I went into Diamond City, into the tallest part of the city. I look down, then I just go down the elevator while I'm looking into the city, and then I'll just walk around a little bit to see how it runs, and overall the frame rate can go as low as 30 frames per second, so it's not that good. I tested this with the Pentium G4560 and the i5, and on this game they are like 10 frames ahead of the Ryzen 5 1400, which is kind of disappointing, but AMD doesn't have that good performance on the CPU side on this game, as I tested when this processor released. But yeah, this game doesn't run that good.
Who needs a haircut? Everyone needs a haircut.
Move along.
Step up. Win the game. Buy a swatter.
Synth-free shopping, right here.
Kim I care cares about
My God.
all this for me.
Now we got Hitman on DirectX 12 using 1080p on a mix between medium and high, and I'll be testing Marrakesh, which is one of the episodes that I had the most issues with on all the CPUs I tested this at. So you'll see that the game will be at close to 60 frames per second, but a lot of times it will drop below 45. There are a lot of NPCs, a lot of alpha effects, a lot of stuff going on at once. I had issues on this level even using an i7 4790, and the frame times are kind of variable. So yeah, this is not the most stable level, but that was the objective of the video, doing a stress test. But you should be fine on other episodes that don't have as many NPCs on screen, but overall it's still playable.
I could just about strangle you. Stomach cramp. What kind of idiot eats shellfish from a buffet? This heat.
Relax.
Now Just Cause 3, I'll be doing 1080p on a mix between high and very high with water tessellation turned off. First, what I will do is explode a bunch of stuff. So a couple gas stations, then I'll fly around a little bit, fighting with the army of the city. And you'll notice that the game drops quite a bit, below 60 frames per second. But that was to be expected, this game isn't running that good. You'll see a lot of stutters, a lot of drops, maybe some freezes every now and then that are quite annoying when moving through the city. But it seems to be just a thing of the game's optimization. Even with my i7 4790, I struggle to maintain constant 60 frames per second, especially when there are explosions or I'm moving fast through the map, which is a big chunk of what this game is. That's why I'm worried about that. It's still playable, but I would recommend a cap to 45 frames per second or 30 frames per second. That'll make the game run better overall, more stable. And you'll see that the free RAM that I have is around 0.8 gigabytes. So the game is using 7.2 gigabytes of RAM. If you use more than 8 gigs, you might have a slightly better experience. I already tried that in a previous video, but it's not a game changer.
Violence in the area. All units converge. All units on alert. Re-establish visual contact.
Overwatch, I'll be doing 1080p with the maximum settings, and the game runs without an issue. I mean, there's not much to say. I cranked up everything to the max, and the game stays over 75 frames per second without an issue. So yeah, Overwatch runs just fine.
Heilteil aktiviert.
I'm taking care of you. I'm patching you up. Let me get you patched up. Thanks. Let's get you back out there. Let me get you patched up.
No one can hide from my sight.
Where does it hurt?
For your own safety, get behind the barrier. Enemy visual healing.
Batman Arkham Knight, I'll be doing 1080p using the highest setting without NVIDIA features, which I turn off completely. I also completely turn off chromatic aberration and film grain, since those effects I think personally that are just annoying to see. And as you can see, I'm in the middle of the city. This place was one of the ones that I had the most performance issues with, both on the CPU and GPU side. There are many enemies on screen, there are some cars going around, there are a lot of lights and shadows and reflections, so all that stuff combined led me to the worst performance overall. And you'll see that I'm below 60 a lot of times in this case, and the game stutters a lot. That's pretty much my issue with this game. The frame rates are quite high, it stats between 45 and over 60 frames per second, but it stutters a lot. I mean, I tried it on different machines, it happens even with my i7 4790 PC, so this game wasn't fixed 100%, which is kind of disappointing since the game is actually quite fun, especially while moving fast through the map. You'll notice those freezes quite consistently. It seems to be the game just loading assets. I tried it with my SSD and the game had a little less stutters. I mean, I have 1.6 gigabytes of RAM free. I tried it with 16 anyway and the game ran pretty much the same. It had less stutters, but it was still very frequent. So I just recommend to cap it at 45 frames per second and hope for the best.
Wherever you've gone, Batman! Is that what I think it is? Stop!
Assassin's Creed Unity, I'll be doing 1080p with the highest settings that I can set it to. One of the problems here is that this game has NVIDIA GameWorks features such as HBAO Plus and soft shadows, the PCSS shadows. Those effects weren't enabled since they usually run awful, plus they don't look that much different. I'll just run into the middle of Paris, going through NPCs, fighting a couple people. And you'll see sometimes when I just attack someone, at the first hit, I get like a very sudden drop in the frame rate. That seems to be pretty normal on most of the time being playing this game. What I will try in this video is just to lower the environment detail from the highest to high, to see if that helps a little with the performance. You'll see it in the video itself. And so far it helped a little bit, but it didn't fix the game by any means. Still is totally playable, don't get me wrong. It's still over 50 frames per second and stats very close to 60. There's not much of an issue with this game. After being patched, this game ran much better. CSGO, I'll be doing 1080p once again with 2x MSAA and the rest cranked up. I know a lot of people want to see this on 1024 by 768 at the lowest setting to see what frame rate I can get. But I don't want this video to be over 25 minutes long, so I will just be showing you 1080p with the highest setting at 2x MSAA. In this case, I will just show you the benchmark, since a lot of people wanted me to run this test instead of the gameplay itself. And well, this benchmark has pretty much everything. A very open area, it has smoke, it has NPCs, explosions, all that kind of stuff. So pretty much everything you want to see is here. When you get into smoke, the game can drop below 30 frames per second. I'm not sure on why that happens, but you can see everything there, and I hope it helps. Watch Dogs 2, once again I'm doing 1080p. I'll be using pretty much a mix between medium and high with temporal filtering. So the game just uses a temporal reprojection of the previous frame. So we're actually on a lower resolution and the game just fills in the gaps with information of previous frames. So this is not actually full 1080p. This is less, but using that checkerboarding trick. I know a lot of people says it's blurry. It is, but it's not that noticeable. It's much better than a 900p image. I can be sure of that, and I just use it to be on a higher frame rate.
Squad, we've got shots fired.
Shots fired! Get out!
Engaging. Suspects lost us. We'll stick around and take them out.
Rise of the Tomb Raider, I'll be using DirectX 12 with exclusive full screen turned on and 1080p. And on the settings, I'm using pretty much a mix between medium and high. Just a couple settings are on medium to be closer to 60 frames per second, but overall you'll see in the video that I'm able to get to 60 with some drops on some small places below 60. The game runs just fine, it's very smooth. And don't try it on DirectX 11, it's a stuttery mess compared with this, but overall I can highly recommend it.
They needed most of the lumber to repair the guard towers. We'll have to make do with what we have.
Lara, I'm sorry if Sophia was less than welcoming.
I understand. I'm just glad you were there to vouch for me.
My people have spent decades fighting outsiders. It's not an easy habit to break. See if you can lend a hand with the preparations. A little hard work would go a long way towards building trust.
I'll see what I can.
Forza Horizon 3, I'll be using a mix between medium, high and ultra. You can check the settings in the video itself. I'll be doing 1080p and you'll see that there is a new option in the options menu called threaded optimization, which is something that was added in the newest patch that allows the game to use the extra threads of the CPU. And overall, this was a great addition to the options menu. In the past, just CPU 1 was at 90%, the rest were at 10 to 15%, which wasn't a good use of the available threads. So now with this update, the game runs better. It's much easier to be over 60 frames per second. But yeah, there are some drops every now and then, as you'll notice in the video itself. But those happen when there are many races on screen. Plus, you are in the middle of the city, and there are reflections all over the buildings and all that kind of stuff. So expect better performance outside of the city. And finally we have Doom. I'll be using TSSAA ATX plus 1080p and the maximum settings, except a couple things like shadows and textures. I cannot use Nightmare shadows or Nightmare textures since the game requires at least 6GB of VRAM, so it won't allow me to enable those options. And I'm also using the Vulkan API since it runs much better on AMD if I use Vulkan over OpenGL. And so far the game is over 90 frames per second without much of an issue. Sometimes it drops below 80, but we're over 60 pretty much all the time. No issues whatsoever with this one. So to sum up, the Ryzen 5 1400 with the RX 470 isn't a bad combination at all. You can play most games at 60 frames per second and above. There are some that use a lot of CPU that will run between 45 and 60 frames per second. So if you don't mind some drops to 45 frames, you'll be fine. There are some exceptions like Just Cause 3. That one is kind of a mess on all the systems I tried it on. I would even consider using an RX 570 on this one or overclocking the Ryzen 5 1400. If you get an aftermarket cooler, you can easily get it to 3.8 GHz and it will run the games even better than what I showed you here. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's running fine. I enjoyed myself playing the games. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. And let me know if you want me to test the GTX 1060 next. Thanks for watching and see you next time.